Good morning. Let me just prepare my watch. I wouldn't want to go beyond 30 minutes allotted to me. Okay, my time starts now. My job is to provide you with a backgrounder and to introduce to you the theme of our three-day conference, which, as you can see on the screen, is Innovation, Asian Philanthropy Landscape for a Stronger Development Ecosystem. We live in a highly globalized community where almost everybody, the majority of nations in the world, have access to global information. We just don't have to rely on what newscasts on TV tell us. You don't have to rely only on what you hear from the radio or from what you read on printed newspapers, because everything practically is at the tip of your finger. All you have to do is just log in, click the key on the pad, and that's it. You can get practically all the information you want. And this has both a positive and negative side to it. Positively because it keeps us abreast of the good things happening around us, like the latest developments and advances in the field of science and technology. We know how through these things, practically the quality of life of man is gradually improving. We become aware of the different initiatives or programs taken by different governments or states geared at alleviating poverty worldwide and so forth. That's the good side of it. That's the good news. But also, through global information, we become aware of the bad things happening around us. We're talking about, for example, situation in the world today. Am I pointing it there? Okay. You just click it. Okay. We cannot deny the fact that there's still much to be done as far as poverty alleviation is concerned. And a recent survey conducted by the World Bank last March 2019 using POVCalNet, you must have heard of that, no? It's an interactive computational tool that allows us to calculate and estimate the extent of absolute poverty in the world today. We know that while on the one hand, let us say, even among the poorer nations in Asia, great things have been done. For example, in Bangladesh, in Bhutan, in Sri Lanka, in Papua New Guinea, and even in India, no? We have seen a considerable amount of progress in the field of poverty alleviation, and yet millions of people still continue to live below poverty line. And believe it or not, there are hundreds and millions of people in Asia who have to survive and deal with a $1.90 per capita per day earning. 1.90. That's in Philippine peso, that's about 100 pesos a day. That's 3,000 pesos a month. And what can you do with that? With 3,000 pesos, if you have mouths to feed and you have bills to pay and so forth. But unfortunately, that's a sad situation in the world today. However, the latest statistics, I think, all serve to remind us that there's still much to be done, and this is where philanthropy sets in. Philanthropy rests on three fundamental presuppositions. First, it rests on the basic presupposition that the entire human family forms just one big family. All of us are members of this big human family, no? And since we are members of one big human family, then we are all brothers and sisters among ourselves. And as members of one big human family, we cannot afford to be indifferent to the plight, especially of the needy and the less fortunate people around us. And as members of one and the same human family, we are supposed to care for one another, to be concerned with one another, to demonstrate love towards one another. And that is what philanthropy is all about, from the Greek words philia and anthropos. It is love of man, love of humanity. And when we talk about love, it is something concrete. It is not so much an abstract idea, but something that should translate itself into concrete initiatives. So that's the first presupposition of philanthropy. We are all members of one big human family. Second, still talking about love, love is a universal phenomenon. You will find that anywhere, in all cultures, in all religions, and so forth, no? Love, or what others prefer to call as caritas, is a universal phenomenon. In fact, it affects both believers and non-believers alike. It touches the human heart independently of one's faith or religious belief. For Christians, caritas is the word for it, and it is an application of the commandment of love of our Lord Jesus Christ, and it is supposed to characterize all those who believe in him. Buddhism also has its own way of practicing charity through the so-called humanistic Buddhism, initiated by a 19th century Chinese Buddhist named Taishu, whose teachings are now followed by millions of Chinese and Taiwanese worldwide. The Muslims have their own concept of charity, which they call zakah or zakat. And it is the third pillar of Islam and enjoins Muslims to be charitable and to provide for the needy. And aside from the zakah or zakat, which is obligatory charity, they also have the so-called zadaqah or voluntary charity. In Hinduism, you have the concept of daan, a Sanskrit word for charity, which is an important part of a person's dharma or religious duty. Every individual, therefore, has a duty or dharma towards his family, friends, extended family members, and the society. And Hinduism emphasizes charity or the act of giving aimed at public benefit. So without this love, we cannot talk about philanthropy. That's the second presupposition of it. Third is promotion of social justice. So aside from a sense of belongingness or belonging to and being a member of one big human family, philanthropy also promotes responsible management and distribution of the world's material resources. The existence of economic imbalance, the ever-widening gap between the rich and the poor, between highly developed and industrialized nations or first world countries on the one hand and poor, under or undeveloped third world countries on the other hand, demonstrates a failure on our part to responsibly manage the world resources. Philanthropy challenges us to restore social justice. In this regard, it is not just a question of sharing a part of your wealth or a part of your material surplus with others, but of giving back to them what we have deprived them of in the first place. Let us remember that if we want to compare world resources to a cake, every portion of the cake that we eat for ourselves means depriving others of the possibility to take a bite of that same cake. So that's how it works. So these are three very simple presuppositions of philanthropy. I repeat that we are all members of one big human family, and then that love is universal, and that philanthropy is about the promotion of social justice. Now, let's talk about philanthropy in Asia. Asia is a very fertile ground for philanthropy. Here we have extreme situations. It is a region of striking contrast. I remember yesterday when I was touring around Kuala Lumpur, I saw these billboards along the highway saying that Malaysia is a land, specifically Kuala Lumpur is a city of contrast and cultural diversity. You can take that expression positively or negatively. Now, negatively interpreted, talking about contrast, unfortunately, a privileged few here in Asia can afford to squander money on useless things, while a vast majority wallows in poverty. We have very rich countries. We have Japan, Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, China, and so forth on the one hand, and less fortunate, let's say undeveloped countries like Nepal, Papua New Guinea, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and so forth on the other hand. So again, the question is, what can we do about it? Luckily, there are already existing philanthropic initiatives in the region attempting to address the situation. In October 2017, a study was conducted, and this was published only last year, 2018, conducted by Pauline Tan, a research associate of ACCEP, ACSEP, or Asia Center for Social Entrepreneurship and Philanthropy, and Sui Sung Lam, associate professor of finance at the National University of Singapore Business School and director of ACCEP. And their study demonstrates that there is a continuous increase in the number of philanthropic foundations and trusts in Asia. In China, for example, from 739 foundations in the year 2004, the number has increased to 4,907 in 2015. In Singapore, on the other hand, more and more wealthy individuals and families are setting up foundations, trusts, and funds to institutionalize their giving. Thus, over 400 of them are currently registered in Singapore. Foundations in Asia are projected to give $364 billion towards sustainable development. That's their goal from the year 2016 and 2030. Now, when we talk about foundations in Asia, they can be of different types. They can be corporate foundations, family foundations, independent foundations, community foundations, and so forth. But basically, all foundations in Asia are characterized by these three things. First is operational model. Second one is philanthropic focus. And third one is governance structure. As to the operational model, they can be fundamentally of two types: operating foundations or grant-making foundations. When you say operating foundations, meaning these are foundations that directly draft and implement programs. While when you say grant-making foundations, these are foundations that do not really have their own programs, but they give, let us say, to civic society organizations or the NGOs and so forth. No? And after evaluation, they disburse grants and so forth. Or foundations can be, of course, a combination of both these two types. Now, as to the philanthropic focus, foundations have different ways of generating funds. They have different modes of operating funding. We can also talk about geographic focus. Foundations here in Asia can be regional, national, or international. Studies reveal, for example, that foundations in Myanmar and China tend to give nationally and operate their own programs, while foundations in developed economies like Singapore and Hong Kong tend to give both regionally and nationally via grants to civil society organizations that operate programs, meaning they do not directly run the programs themselves. As to governance structure, which determines who oversees the foundation's decision-making and day-to-day operations, there are instances when it is the family members who do it. Sometimes there's a professional staff, but still with a predominant presence of family members in the board. Or it can also be a professional staff with independent board, meaning no family member in the board. Now, as to the different things that motivate people to give, the same study reveals, or was able to identify, the following motivations that lead donors to give. First, we have the desire to give back to the society. This includes a sense of duty, a sense of social responsibility, a sense of gratitude, because they think that, look, if ever I have become quite successful, financially speaking, in my own field, in my own business and so forth, that's because a society has helped me a lot and has made that possible. Therefore, it is just right that I, in one way or another, give back to this same society what it has provided me. So that is a sense of social gratitude there. Second, we have the desire to drive or bring about social change. For example, to combat social inequality, to alleviate poverty, to provide essential services, and so forth. Third is family and personal values, like the promotion of knowledge and leadership. In many instances, especially in family foundations, they use philanthropy as a training ground for members of the family before they are allowed to venture into family businesses. It's a training ground for them. And then they also have that sense of charity and compassion and so forth. Fourth, we have prestige and status, like in the case of the so-called nouveau riche of the society. No? Or sometimes it's a company's way of building up social reputation. The more you give, the more people get a chance to know about your company, and it's some sort of a social business promotion. No? So that boosts practically the company's reputation. Number 5, we have religious motivations, that I have already mentioned. We have the Christian concept of caritas, we have almsgiving, the Muslim concept of zakah or zakat, Hindu and Buddhist idea of daan, generous giving, confusion, altruism, and so forth. And then we have personal experience, like how one personally escaped poverty, became successful in business activity. Therefore, we know, familiar with stories of people who started, let us say, from rags to riches, no? People who started as poor in the society and then eventually becoming successful. And in return, these people feel that if I made it, why should I not help people achieve the same success that I have achieved, no? So it's based on a purely personal experience. Or sometimes on the part of many people who are now on a pension, have retired from their professional job, it's a way of keeping themselves busy. You know, you're not doing anything anymore, you're done with your job, so why not engage in something good? So they decided to be more active in some philanthropic activities. Or sometimes it's a result of surviving a traumatic experience. A person has had a traumatic accident, survived that accident, and now that person wants to share that experience and wants those who have become victims of the same accident to continue living. And lastly, we have personal affiliation, and this is something I think associated with a typical Asian sense of nationalism and regionalism. Sometimes we are particularly attached, for example, to our own hometown, to our country. We have community ties. We have emotional link to our roots and so forth, no? So if ever we should decide to give something to other people, we begin with the members of our own society, with our own cities, with our own hometown, and so forth, no? So these were the main reasons that, let us say, motivate philanthropists to give, according to that 2017 study I have cited. Now, where do the money go? This is where your money go, and I'm sure you can relate to this, no? Foundations in Asia support a vast spectrum of causes, ranging from education, and I'm sure many of you here are coming from different schools, no? In the Philippines, we have this problem of sustainability, and especially in the part of private schools, you don't get sufficient government funding. It's really a question of survival of the fittest, no? So we believe that philanthropy is one way of helping us out of our predicament. So we have education, health issues, poverty alleviation, disaster relief. Again, there are many places in countries in Asia which are very prone to natural disasters. Now we're talking about typhoons, earthquakes, and so forth. No? And then we have arts and culture, environment conservation, climate change, etc. So indeed, needs are not lacking. What we need now are people willing to do something about it, to respond concretely to those needs. Aside from foundations, trusts, and funds, here in Asia, we also witnessed the proliferation of the so-called giving circles. Giving circles where members pledge to give a certain amount within a particular period of time. You can be a member of this giving circle, no? So you will decide, okay, within the next 10 years, every month I will be giving this particular amount to this circle. And that goes to philanthropy, no? Like the New Day Asia in Hong Kong. Now, one thing is clear. No matter what type of philanthropic initiative one takes or engages himself in, we cannot work in isolation. We should rather work as an ecosystem, helping one another in any possible way. Lastly, to end my presentation, it would be good if we engage in any philanthropic initiative or gesture, not so much because we are forced to do so, but because we love to do so. In other words, our philanthropic actions should really come from the heart, a concrete manifestation of our generosity. St. Paul, during his farewell speech to the elders of Ephesus, quoted words which he attributes to Jesus. There is more joy in giving than in receiving. One may not be a Christian believer or may refuse to accept the words of a Christian apostle like St. Paul. But the joy that comes from the act of giving is something that we can instill in the hearts of all men and women who are in the position to extend any material help to their less fortunate fellow men. We should be thankful that we are not the ones needing help, as many of our less fortunate neighbors are. We believe that there is a reason why we find ourselves in a position to give and not in the situation of need. Let us then open our hearts and make the most of our resources. The joy of giving is at the very heart of philanthropy. It has inspired countless men and women to reach out to others, most especially to the needy. Philanthropy, therefore, can be a real source of joy for many of us, just as it can bring about joy to those who will receive help from us. As we gather together on this 3-day conference, let us share ideas. Let us learn from one another, connect with one another, as we try to define the face of philanthropy in the Asian landscape. Indeed, there is much to do. And as we discuss and share ideas among ourselves, let us remember that there are millions of people out there waiting for our help. And let us not only help them by offering material things on a silver platter. Let us help them help themselves. Or as an old proverb puts it, give a man fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Thank you for listening.